Hey everyone, great to be with you again virtually, and certainly looking forward to working with you this year. Three visits scheduled this year, which I'm very excited about. Starting to feel like well, not starting to, I feel like I'm part of the ACS family. So really looking forward to our visits and continuing to dig deep into assessment. I still think about that first Saturday workshop that some of you attended back in 2015 when I was at the NISA conference, and Eddie and Mike had me come over and do 3 hours, and then since then, off and on, been visiting the school. So super excited to work with you all this coming year, and looking forward to digging deeper into our assessment work for sure. I thought I might start with just some general reminders and good things to always remind ourselves of when it comes to assessment. It's been really impressive for me to watch the growth as a school. And certainly there were a lot of, practices that were ahead of the curve, but long before I arrived at the school and working with you all. But certainly in my time, seeing a lot of the way that the questions have evolved that you've asked me, the depth of our conversations, a lot of the work we've been doing, it's just been impressive to be a part of that. And certainly I've been impressed with the way that the seriousness with which those conversations have unfolded. So super excited and wishing you all a great startup. So I thought I'd begin with just a few big ideas, some reminders, things that are always good to remind ourselves of when it comes to our assessment work and the way that we use assessment. So the first reminder for me would be just reminding us that assessment isn't just a clinical exercise and number crunching, that we're really after not just achievement, but building hope and efficacy through assessment. Hope, of course, is that light at the end of the tunnel. Efficacy is that deep-rooted belief that you can do it. And anytime our assessment practices build hope and efficacy as well as achievement, we're really on the right path as far as I'm concerned. Two would be to prioritize feedback. Really focus in on using assessment formatively, which prioritizes the use of effective feedback, not so much grade scores and levels. As we know, grades and scores can interfere with the student's willingness to keep learning, especially if they are satisfied with the score and they start to ignore your feedback. The key to effective feedback is ensuring that we get that productive response from the students. And so sometimes the most favorable course of action is to give feedback in absence of grades and scores. Number three would be along those same lines, would be to emphasize quality over counting. Quality speaks to the degree to which a student has accomplished something versus just counting how many correct. Now, of course, there is a place for that, but often counting how many correct fails to involve or sort of encapsulate the type of error that the student is making. So even though we could both get to the same percentage correct, the errors that I made were simple mistakes, or the errors that another student makes are egregious errors or a lack of understanding. So sometimes not all 70% or 80% are created equal. So really focusing on quality over counting. Fourth, and this speaks to the ATLs, and I think a lot of the work that you've been doing over the years with the ATLs is really emphasizing this notion of separating achievement from non-achievement factors. And the ATLs really help you do that. But just continuing to remind ourselves of two things. One is that the behavior and learning are inextricably linked on one level. So how I act, my attendance, my work ethic, all of those things will impact my achievement, but it's separating them from the direct impact. So I'm not able to behave my way up or down the achievement scale. So making sure we focus on that clarity, because it's that clarity that allows us to drill down and get a little more specific on that. And finally, just number five would be to bring students inside the assessment process as much as possible. Rick Stiggins said years ago at a conference, and I never forgot this, when he said, the person who does the assessing does the learning. And so anytime you can bring the students inside the process, make them aware of the work that is formative and the focus on feedback. Can they give themselves feedback? Can they self-assess? Are they able to co-construct criteria with you? Are they able to really get inside, help one another? Are they able to think about and advocate and have agency and choice and voice and all of these things that we really do talk about and advocate for? Can we bring students inside that process? Those are so big five reminders. Be mindful of the emotional side of assessment. prioritize feedback, emphasize quality over counting. Remember that separation of achievement and non-achievement factors, which again, I think is pretty seamless for you. And number 5, how can we bring students inside that process? Some of you might remember a few years ago, we did a little bit of an assessment planning workshop. I spent some time with different groups working on assessment planning. And this is going to lead into this discussion around what is extending proficiency and what might that look like. When we did our assessment planning workshop, we really talked about the importance of planning and laying out the assessments in a purposeful way. Most teachers do a great job at planning units of studies and how to sort of scaffold curriculum and how to begin to layer things on top of each other. The area that I often see, and so this is an ACS thing, this is a fairly ubiquitous, is the one thing that I think that is maybe less common is the assessment planning. How do I purposefully or strategically plan to increase sophistication on the pathway to proficiency? So when I talk about assessment planning, it's really talking about, so in those workshops, we're talking about how do we, through our learning progression, and a learning progression is how do I lead students through DOK levels, how do I get them to the full sophistication of the standard? So again, the standard is at a particular level of sophistication. When we unpack that standard, we're really looking at the underpinnings. We're looking at what are the knowledge, skills necessary to meet that standard? Like, what are the ingredients necessary to make the meal? So our learning progression leads students through an increase or an uptick in sophistication. And it's very thoughtful, I think, and very purposeful to make sure that assessment is planned alongside of that, so that where you have those pivotal moments, where you have those moments where sophistication increases, having a moment of assessment, whether formal or informal, that really informs whether or not the students are ready for the next step, and if they're not, what is the intervention that's necessary to get most, if not all of them there, and if they are, then to carry on. So that assessment planning alongside your unit planning is something that I would encourage you all to revisit or begin to explore as you move through those units of study. Thinking about how I get them there. And of course, at the very youngest of grade levels, we're talking about pre-K and kindergarten and first grade, et cetera. A lot of your standards are not, they're at the knowledge level, they're at the foundation level. So we're not really unpacking anything. It's really just to understand that if you have standards that are at a higher level of sophistication, that assessment planning alongside. But even if you're dealing with knowledge level or DOK1, we really want to think about where we strategically place those assessments along that trajectory. So a learning progression really takes us vertically through toward the standard. It takes us, from the simple to the sophisticated. And the easiest way to understand what a learning progression is to think about whether or not you've taught a child how to swim, or if you've taught a child how to ride a bicycle, it is likely that you've created a learning progression. But the question of extending proficiency really speaks to, once we get to the full iteration or the full sophistication of the standards, what does that mean to reach that top tier of sophistication? So what I love about your scale is that each level is considered a level of proficiency, because it really is, the degree to which you are proficient. Even when you're emerging, you have some semblance of correctness, right? So I love that. And so when we're thinking about now in our assessment planning, we want to plan both for that learning progression and where we strategically put our assessments, but we also want to plan for how do we create the opportunity for extending proficiency. So I think it's important that we come to some common understanding of that. And my 2 cents on that would be this. First, we have to agree that we are going to make the extending proficiency available and accessible to the students. It's going to be transparent. I just never believe in assessment as trickery and having the students kind of figure out on their own. We know that we have students in your school and other schools who blow the standards out of the water. And it's not a question of that. It's really a question of whether it should funnel back to their grades or not. So when you have an 8th grade student who writes like a freshman in college or a high school student, that certainly is impressive, and we want to honor that and nurture that as far as their learning is concerned. Whether or not that then sets the standard for an A, we'll end up backwards curving if we say, well, if that's a extending, then how can this be an extending? And that other extending is simply someone who is, working at that sophisticated level for that grade level. So it's really important to think about how this all plays out from an extending perspective. So the first thing, you make sure it's accessible, transparent, everybody knows the rules of the game, right? The other thing to think about when it comes to extending is making sure that it is that the criteria never speaks to the next grade level, that it's really not about above and beyond, but it is an increase in sophistication. So keep it clear, keep it transparent, and then make sure it is the most sophisticated iteration of this that we could typically expect from someone in this grade level. Knowing that you're going to have kids blow it out of the water, but that can't be a sliding scale for what sets the bar. We don't want to keep moving it up and down. Things to think about when it comes to extending. First, the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about your definition, because your definition speaks to, working at an exceptional level, exceptional proficiency or consistency, transferability, and all of that. So when I hear that, I think about sophistication. So I think about the difference between someone who can clinically do the standard, somebody who can write an argumentative paper, or somebody who can demonstrate at a fairly competent level, versus having some unique or creative way to put forth their position or put forth their argument. So think about what is sophisticated, what would be something that is unique, or a kind of way that they might demonstrate their learning that would be somewhat atypical. The other thing I think about is application. I think about real world application, or being able to synthesize. One of the critical parts of critical thinking, for example, is synthesis. There's analysis, there's synthesis, there's critique. So can the student not just understand the standard clinically, but can they apply it into a real life dilemma? Is it something that is authentically applicable? Is it something where it is a sophisticated iteration, but it's authentic and it's real world based, if you will? The other thing I think of when it comes to extending is, making connections. Can I take this concept to the bigger ideas? Can I say, for example, examine different periods in history and begin to connect the dots about what it means, the ebbs and flows of economics, or what are the consistent characteristics of revolution, or things like that. So I always think about, where could somebody authentically demonstrate their learning? Could they connect to some big ideas, looking at, say, the themes of history, or transcending different disciplines within science? So it isn't just an issue of physical science or life science, but they're able to transfer that across as a skill, something like analyzing and interpreting data. Can they do it on a sophisticated level? So sophistication, real world application, atypical circumstances. Can they do it in situations that are authentically blended and synthesized in those environments, right? So can I do it under the conditions that most replicate? And that's really what performance assessments are. They are assessments that attempt to emulate the authentic context within which the skills are meant to be applied. So when you think about extending, think about planning for it, think about it being transparent, think about it making sure that it's not above and beyond, but it is a sophisticated iteration. It's not just competence, but it's a sophisticated way at looking at the standard and the demonstration of learning. So again, I wish you all the best in your startup. First visit will be in October, and can't wait to extend these conversations and begin to, again, just take wherever you are right now in that journey. We're going to continue to refine that and continue to have those conversations to bring assessment and continue to have assessment be at the forefront of the work, because it really is the engine that drives so much of what we do. Anyway, again, have a great startup, and we'll see you soon.